A lot of people in history have been right, but only those who have been able to communicate their rightness have changed the course of history. We're using the metaphor of semaphores for communication because semaphores are a way of communicating. It's kind of a visual Morse code in times of difficulty and storm and danger, as well as good days when all other forms of communication are denied to you. One of the great philosophers of the 18th century, French philosopher Voltaire, had an expression. And he said, very proudly, "If you would speak with me, you first must learn my language." Now, hearing that from him sounds very arrogant and elitist. But you know, by and large, every Sunday, that's the message that the church communicates to postmodern culture. If you would speak with us, if you would have us communicate with you, and if you would communicate with us, you first must learn our language. So what does it mean to learn the language of postmodern culture? Well, first of all, the language of postmodern culture is predominantly a screen language, not a print language. The world in which I was trained to do ministry and the world in which you were trained to do church was dominated by a word-based culture, a print culture. And everything we did revolved around the word. Can you imagine anyone doing any kind of ministry in the modern world and getting away with, "Well, I don't read"? Can you imagine doing ministry in this postmodern world and getting away with, "Well, I don't do computers"? The shift from literacy to graphicacy as the dominant communication skills is illustrated for me in a story about how the Sunday school movement began. In the 1780s, in England, there was a newspaper publisher by the name of Robert Raikes. And Robert Raikes had a passion. He had a passion for the least, the last, and the lost that were on the streets of London and Bristol and other places in England. And he was just totally devastated by the way in which these kids were lost to the future because they did not have literacy skills. They could not communicate. And he believed the church had a mission here to bring the best communication skills of the day to the poorest of the poor. And so he created what was called a Sunday school. Now, why did it take place on Sunday? Well, because these kids were in sweatshops working 60, 70 hours a week during the week. Why was it a school? It was not just, as much Sunday school is today, a nod to God hour. This was a full curriculum in literacy communication skills. And he used the major software and hardware of the 18th century. The church was the first one to give them their first, what? Book. You say, what's so special about that? If I owned this number of books from here to here in the 17th century, I could have had a college named after me. A book cost the equivalent of 1 month's salary. Harvard University was founded by John Harvard, who gave a total of 400 books to establish a library. Books were that valuable, and we have Harvard University named after him because he gave 400 books. You know, if the church were living out of its genes and doing what our forebears did in the 18th century, what would we be doing today? In the early 90s, a computer was the equivalent of a book. It cost about 1 month's salary. Now computers are so cheap they're being given away. There is no excuse for the church not to communicate the gospel in the language of the day. There's no excuse for the church not to help those that need it the most develop the graphicacy skills that they need to function and lead in this new postmodern culture. Every time I turn on my computer, I see a stained glass window. My favorite window story comes from the early days of American settlement. When the Europeans came, they built houses, and the Native Americans were absolutely perplexed by these boxes and these holes in the walls of these houses. And what the Native Americans would do, which scandalized the Europeans, is they would come, walk up close to those windows, and look in to see what was inside and what was going on. Your church is doing ministry in an internet culture with literally millions and soon billions of windows with people looking in. Will your church speak a language that this culture can understand, that it may hear the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ?